Joining me on the program now, Dave Mann. Dave, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Hey, kia ora, Andrew.
This is somewhat unusual in a New Zealand context. What do we know? What's been happening with the Masterton churches, Dave?
Yeah, I heard the news on the Saturday morning, driving my kids somewhere, hearing about what had happened the night before.
Yep.
And for me, it was immediately a point of intrigue. Obviously, an act of violence against churches is wrong. Whoever's done this, they will have their reasons. But I immediately thought to myself, it's going to be interesting to watch how public media actually engage with this, because we live in a culture that doesn't desire to give any credit or very much positivity toward the Christian faith. The churches have responded brilliantly, and there's numerous articles online people could read, as I have. Very limited reference, though, to what the churches are saying outside of being gracious. And so what's really intrigued me here is that from the outset, I suspected that this event is going to be given its moment of fame, because this is necessary, because it's a part of our news. But it's not going to be given anything more than its moment of fame. It's not going to be given any comment, because a religiously secular narrative within public media isn't able to give too much empathy toward the Christian church or profile or positivity toward the Christian church, because there is a background prejudice and desire for the silencing, the subjugating, and the pushing aside of Christianity within our nation. Which is to say that I think there is an anti-Christian prejudice in our nation. I'm not saying that's the cause for the churches being burnt. We don't know.
Yep.
And the Christian response will be to forgive the person who did it. And the pastors are doing brilliantly. But I think there's an important cultural reflection here on what our culture is currently made up of, which is important because we need to think about how we wisely engage with this into the future.
It is an important point, because some people would look at this and go, see, look, we're being persecuted. But, I mean, as you rightly say, we don't know the motivation or the nature of these, what essentially are arson attacks. Was it specifically targeting churches, or was it just a firebug who liked to watch things burn? The motivation isn't clear, as is in Mozambique, where these are obviously religious motivated attacks. But from what you're saying, Dave, despite the fact that the actual fires may not be religious persecution, there's a form of persecution or ignoring the value of Christianity in the way in which media are responding to it.
Yeah, one of the hardest cultures in the world to see is your own.
Yeah.
Because it's like the fish that swims in water and says, there is no water, and argues to your face. And which is like the atheist saying that all cultures are charitable and I'm a good person. The word good has no meaning if there is no God.
Yeah.
And all cultures aren't charitable like our culture is. We've got 27,000 charities in New Zealand. I'm yet in my reading of history to find a single reference to an organization existing for charitable purposes prior to the time of Christ. And so yes, there's a prejudice. And if you look at, the telling of history, the attacks on the missionaries are unreasonable, all things considered.
Yeah.
In fact, I have heard critiques of Henry Williams spoken by Māori, which repeat the false lies and accusations against Henry Williams that were in the British tabloids to try to undermine Henry Williams. Why? Because the missionaries were defending Māori.
Yeah.
The key problem with New Zealand's missionaries is they stood next to Māori. That's why they were attacked. And the fact that, 150 plus years later, we're still repeating that. Why? And why hasn't that been addressed? I've heard politicians talk about our democracy and the way it comes from the Greeks. But our democracy doesn't remotely come from the Greeks. Their democracy was a system of shared power amongst the elite to protect themselves, while they had myriads of slaves, gross inequality and human suffering with very little to no charity.
Yeah.
Our system of democracy comes from belief that God created everyone in his image. Human life is therefore intrinsically valuable. To protect the individual, you need a limited power of government. And so we've journeyed through to a democratic system on the basis of believing people are created in the image of God. It's an entirely different premise for the system. The university, the same. I've got a historian friend, who's confided, I wouldn't say where he is, but that he can speak positively about Christian influence in our history, and he will get jeers back at him from the 18, 19, 20-year-old students who have already been prejudiced within our culture, so much so against Christianity, that if you speak positively about it in history, you have to say at least 5 negative things to bring any sense of balance.
Yeah.
In politics and in media, therefore, whenever Christianity comes up, if the good sort on the TV program is actually a Christian, you don't want to refer to their Christian faith. And if some mosques had burnt, this would be an act of racism and of Islamophobia. If some marae had been burnt, definitely that would be racism.
Yep.
But if some churches are burnt, there was a boxthorn hedge burnt somewhere the other day as well. Let's just stay quiet and see how quickly we can get this passed without any comment. I think it's worth noticing to understand our environment.
I mean, this is certainly worth noticing, and very well put there, that if this was an arson attack on another centre of worship within our society, the response of the media would be different. But what do we do with this, Dave? Because honestly, the response from the local Masterton pastors is actually quite a good one. To respond with grace, to respond with forgiveness, to respond as we would see Jesus responding in the Gospels. In some ways, yes, the struggle is real, the persecution, the bias is real, but the way of grace says we don't want to make too much of a fuss on that. How do we get the balance right, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Masterton pastors are therefore doing it perfectly, and with all credit to the mayor and to the community there is support, there is empathy, there are some builders who've volunteered time to come and help to repair the churches. So there's certainly compassion and support for Christianity within our community. I think for the wider picture of this, it's like the frog in the water that's heating up unaware.
Yeah.
We've got to be aware we have a culture and there is an anti-Christian prejudice. So that awareness and understanding that is the first. I think secondly, the key response is what's being done. It is love. Christian charity leaves people with no words to attack the Christian church. This is the frustration for the person who desires the subjugating of Christianity in society. Christianity keeps doing good, so man, how are we supposed to get rid of them? Yeah. And so we keep loving because that's the way of Christ. But I think that we have to understand and tell the stories of history that are going to provide the counter-narrative. We have to understand where our democracy came from. So when it's claimed that it comes from the Greeks, we actually know that it didn't. And when the missionaries are being hammered in someone's story, yes, the missionaries did imperfect things, as everybody has, but actually they were the greatest force for good that existed in our country. We only have the treaty to Trinity because of them. Yep. So we actually need to know and to tell the story. At every single level, we need to learn to tell the story because that's what changes the perspective. And I suggest that's the only thing that can actually address the underlying prejudice. Now, to give just one story in comparison, I remember seeing the same pattern when Taranaki churches united maybe 5 years ago. Pastor Steve Batten organised it. Yeah. A combined church service right across Taranaki on a Sunday morning. Churches right across the province closed their doors together. Car park problems, road problems, the TSB stadium, thousands of people. The media turn up looking for the story to tell. And do you know how many words they could have talked about unity, the charity of the churches? You could do a 2 or 3 page spread on the content that was taking place in that combined church gathering. Yeah. How many words do you think went next to the one picture that appeared in the newspaper? It was about 150 words. They had absolutely nothing they knew how to say because their prejudice didn't want to allow Christianity to be lifted up. We need to tell the stories that can challenge that prejudice. At the same time, well done to Masterton churches. They've handled this with grace. Yep. And we pray that the Lord will continue to give them that wisdom and also community support to see the buildings repaired.
And hey, maybe in this situation, saying, help, I'm being repressed, or claiming to be the victim in this situation, even if there's some truth beside it, isn't necessarily helpful in the narrative. Dave, thank you for your wisdom and understanding. Thanks for shining a light on this story that was perhaps glossed over by other media. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Cheers, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.